Hey guys, this is Dave Sebastian, coordinator of mentoring art programming with Wayside Youth and Family out of Framingham. I wanted to welcome you guys to my home studio. Over here you can see a lot of my artwork up. I wanted to show you guys around a little bit, see what you think. This is basically my silly office with all of my art supplies, artwork, collectibles. This is a Canon PhotoJet printer, prints 13 by 19 photos. Right on. So that is my home studio, and welcome to it. Sorry about that. So today we are bringing back our studio workshop series in this virtual format. Super excited about the opportunity to work with some of my friends again. I really miss all of the young adults that come to both my open studio programs and my new program I've been running at the Kiva Center in Worcester. Super miss all you guys. So this is not quite as cool as spending some time with you guys, but this is the best thing that I can do. So we're going to be here for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, going over some aspects of how to create a custom skateboard with an airbrush. I realize everyone doesn't have an airbrush, but if you come to Open Studios, I have some there. Once this health problem we have going on is over, we'll be in the studio Wednesdays 10:30 to 2:30 and Fridays 10:30 to 3. I have all of the gear I'm going to show you today in that location, and we can make any of these things that you want. So the first thing I wanted to do was to show you guys the deck itself and what the finished product kind of hopefully will look like, and go from there. So this is what the deck for the client looks like right now. So this is built with a stencil and painted 3 times, and then I worked on it with paint marker after that. So that's what we're hoping to create. These skateboards are not to skate. These are for the purpose of art and to sell them. You know, I would love to create ones to skate, but you wouldn't necessarily airbrush those because they're not going to take the, you know, the beating that a regular skateboard could take. So today we're going to work on that. Now we're going to put it on one of these old decks that are right here. All of the decks that we're using and all the decks I've used in the past in the Open Studios were given to us by Vans Sneakers. They were part of a sporting event related to skating, you know, like an X Games type event. All of the folks that were using them were sponsored by Vans. Specifically, it was Doug Moore, who was the guy who gave me the decks. They had this interesting problem, which is that kids who are sponsored around 13 or 14 to skate one day turn 40 and have honestly not a lot of skills because they've been skating for a job for a really long time, and skating is a legitimate job until you can't do it anymore, until you get hurt. So both Doug and some other folks had this idea of like showing folks what you could do, the next generation of what you could be as a skater. Doug is a construction worker by trade, so his idea was to show kids how to build their own ramps. And he has a ramp business called Colonial Ramps, and this is what he does, you know. And as a you know, professional skateboarder, he has a unique view of how to do that. And so another guy had an idea about cutting decks up and creating useful household items or art items out of them. This wasn't as popular as the ramp program, so he had a lot of decks left. And they were basically sitting, you know, in a warehouse in Boston, and nobody was using them. So they gave us about 30 skateboards and about 40 pieces of skateboards. So in the Open Studio and the Greenhouse Graphics program, we've painted a huge number of these skateboards and had really, you know, a fantastic time working with them. One of the great things about skateboards in general is that everybody stickers them really significantly. Even the ones that I have from this event, broken and stuff, all are covered in stickers. And then the companies themselves rarely produce blank skateboards or blank decks for the purpose of like they want to identify that they made that deck. You know, every skateboard is a little different. Anyone who skates totally knows that. But if you don't, the curve, the dip of a skateboard, the rises on the end are all purpose built, you know, for like certain tricks and certain, you know, applications. There, of course, are general skateboards too. And like, so I had a really hard time finding blank skateboards. I have finally found them pretty recently. I can show you what those look like. So blank skateboards look like this. This particular one is dipped in a black dye, which is great because, man, it makes it black as possible. And as you can see here, using used decks, there's some stuff up with the paint that stays. Now I painted this pretty lightly because I was just doing it as a test to paint over. But even with the paint that comes on it, it decays a little, and our painting process is not super easy on it. So this deck has been, I've been working on it for, you know, probably about a week. I'm doing 4 of these blank decks for an art show that's coming up, and they're all going to be different interpretations of these 2 characters. Now these 2 characters, this is a photo of the board just so you guys can see it a little bit better. So these 2 characters are Japanese astrological symbols. And so when I first saw them, they were on a sticker produced by the client, and they looked okay, but as I got closer to them, I realized that their resolution is very low. And if folks don't know what resolution means, resolution is how many pixels there are in building an individual image. More pixels, like 300 dots per inch, or DPI, would be a really high quality image. 75 would be a really low quality image. So when you're looking for your artwork on Google, all the way at the end, you see a little key that says search tools. Click on that and it gives you how long ago the post was, but the next is the size. And if you're using this for artwork, you want to pick something that's pretty good size. 300 DPI is not bad. You know, anything over like 2 is kind of fine. And you can tell the resolution of an image by zooming up real lot. Now, if you're using really a PC or a Mac, you just hit the control or the command key and plus, and that'll bring you really, really close to any artwork, and you can see if it has anti-aliasing. Anti-aliasing is that stepping that you see when you get too close to something, or these days Minecraft does it intentionally, which I think is an amazing turnaround. So the first thing you got to do is you got to find the artwork you want, and then you got to find a pretty high resolution version of that. And you can bring it into any number of image editors. These days there's a few out there. I'm using Photoshop, which is not expensive and is an absolutely worthwhile investment as an artist. You know, all of us these days have to do some of our work digitally because you're not going to be able to distribute it physically. I mean, today it's even more so than it was a month ago. You know, now you can't even really set up in galleries and hope people are going to come see the work because, you know, we're not supposed to be going out. So virtual gallery shows are really going to be the future and are the present, really. I mean, like, look at Instagram, Facebook. These are loaded with artwork. Beyonce and Deviant all have been loaded with artwork for, you know, like 15 years now. The great thing about it is that you can see a lot of people's work, you know, and that kind of stuff. And if you want to be a part of this community, you're going to have to, at the very least, photograph and get your artwork onto online, you know. So anyway, what you got to do is you got to find some of this artwork. The end of thing would be that Photoshop is very inexpensive these days. It's an online, you know, membership type based process, but it's about $10 a month for Photoshop and Lightroom. This is an absolutely worthwhile investment. Back in the day, it was about $1,500, and that didn't include the updates. Today, it's updated nearly daily. Their bug fix process is totally unbelievable. It's really, really great, and I think that everybody should at least consider using it. You know, Adobe's the industry standard, you know, so I mean, if you're going to do any digital image manipulation, I find they're pretty good. Now, if you're going to physically draw on the computer, then Illustrator is designed for that. Photoshop, I absolutely do draw in Photoshop all the time, and for $10 a month, it's not bad. Illustrator and the rest of the suite of Adobe programs, which I gotta think is somewhere in the 30 range, including Acrobat, which is the PDF application from Adobe, but allows you to fill out PDFs, which I don't know about you guys, but that is a huge improvement in the process of working online. So in any case, that is that's a pitch for Photoshop, I guess. So what you want to do is to bring it into a video editor, a photo editor of some kind. That would be back in Google. If folks don't know, you'd want to right click on the image, save image as. Good place to save it would be your desktop or your documents. I mostly save things to my desktop and then move the file when I'm done working with it into documents. So you want to put it into a video editor, and you want to look at a photo editor, excuse me. You want to get really close to it and see some things that are details that are simply too small to cut out. Because we're going to be cutting this, whatever image we choose, to make a stencil. So we have to be able to cut it out. So if you have like hairs with lines, or if your entire thing is sketchy, these things make the process a lot harder. The best thing to pick is hard transitions in color. You'll notice with this artwork right here, it's black and then red. In fact, like if you look close, you can see that even the edge, I've added a stroke to that, or some folks call that cell shading. And then underneath these artwork also is a layer of white. So you're looking for something that has a real hard transition, because that'll really, make a huge difference when we're working on it. So after you finish taking out some of those small details, you want to do one of two things. Number one, you can print it and put it under a piece of plastic, tape it to the table and try to just cut the plastic, or draw your copy of your artwork onto the plastic. Physically cutting stencils is a slow, somewhat arduous process. You can get some amazing stuff, but it's going to take you a little while to get, really good with the blades. I use a lot of different X-Acto type blades. This one here, I really like. It's from Friskers. There it is there. It's rubber coated, and it actually has a slot specially made for your finger. You just have to remember to put the blade the right way, which I only remember about half the time. But this is a really good product. Of course, X-Acto has been making razors probably, I think, longer than anybody, but they're really what everybody uses. This Friskers company is just kind of new, and I sort of like them. They make some pretty good paper cutters. Their paper cutters can cut through acetate, and that's a good place to go next, which is what I use to build stencils, is acetate. You can make a stencil out of anything depending on how many times you're going to use it. If you're going to use your stencil one time, you could make it out of a piece of cardboard. Cardboard's not super easy to cut, but you could do it. Or I use a lot of Bristol, which is sort of a heavyweight drawing paper. Think of it as cardstock, like slightly lighter than cardstock. Cardstock itself is not too bad for a single use. Now, obviously, the problem with single-use stencils is as you use the airbrush, they fill in, they soak the material, right? So if you're using paper, it's going to soak in a lot of that, paint. So you don't want to use something that's going to decay on you if you need to use it a couple of times. Now, one of the big problems with that is that if you make a mistake, you might be using that a couple of times, right? And if you happen to, happen to make a mistake and your stencil is extremely complicated, then guess what happens? You're cutting it again. So I recommend using something that will repel the paint, and repel things like water, because all the paints I'm using in today's demo and in general are all water-based products. I use that for two reasons. Number one, airbrushing is a vapor creating art process. We're accelerating paint with air, so there are particles in the air. So we have to kind of like deal with that. You know what I mean? So I use water, especially because I work with all different young adults. And you don't want anybody to be exposed to any kind of chemicals. My studio, which is in Framingham in Tempo Young Adult Resource Center at 68 Henry Street, I'm in the basement there, and we've built out a studio, but we don't have air exchangers. So we do have doors outside and windows, and we open all that stuff when we're airbrushing, but you couldn't possibly use chemical-based products. Now, depending on what you are painting on and your situation, that could be very different. If you're painting on like hard surfaces like cars or fenders and that kind of stuff, you'd want to use an outdoor paint. Our paint is basically made for indoors. That's water. I coat all of our artwork in a clear sealer that's made by Maltau, and it works really well. It's a matte sealer, so it doesn't change the effect of the paint, and it kind of looks pretty good. It helps pull your colors together. So let's get back to our process. The last thing that we did was we downloaded our image, and we're trying to think of the best way to work with it. So we've taken out the little details of Photoshop, and now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to figure out the fastest way to cut it. So physically cutting it is totally fine. Depending on your image, it could be quick enough. Words and stuff are relatively easy to cut. Now, I find myself creating much more complicated stencils. One of the stencils that I've created for this particular project is this one right here. Now, if you look at this close, you can see that there's a lot of detail and there's a lot of sort of subtlety to some of that detail. Now, I've taken out a huge amount of other aspects, small details and stuff. So that I find was very difficult to do for myself cutting. Now, I do a lot of razor artwork. If you look at this wall behind me, these are all collages that are custom cut out of comics. So, I do a ton of razor work. I just find that, if there's an easier way, go with an easier way. You know what I'm saying? So this over here is called a silhouette cameo. And a silhouette cameo is a craft cutter that's basically made for scrapbooking. Scrapbooking is, a fun diversion, but also has a very similar use to building stencils, right? So you're custom cutting out shapes that you want to stick onto pages to create a memory in the scrapbook. But what does that machine do to help them create that, those pages for their scrapbook? What it does is it runs a knife the same as the gun in a printer. So a printer moves across a surface, creating marks where the computer has told it. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but a rip is the memory inside of a printer. This product has a very similar thing. Now, we're running directly off of a computer, obviously, but it's a pretty simple idea, same idea as the printer. So what we do, excuse me, talking, what we do is we take our artwork into the computer. The program, this device here has its own software that's called Silhouette Studio. This is a pretty inexpensive program. I think it was maybe $10 a year. And all it does is give you options of things to cut out and some functionality. The functionality does some small amount of editing and that kind of stuff, but generally speaking, the only thing that I use it for is for trace. Because all we really need to do is to be able to trace things. You know what I mean? And whoop, I wanted to show you guys the interface. So all we need to do is be able to get our artwork in there, our simplified artwork that we've created in whatever digital format we've chosen. As far as file formats for this software, I would go with JPEG or PNG. I'll give you guys my 5-minute spiel on image formats. I realize this is not a program about digital artwork, so I'm not going to go too much into it. Next week, we'll be talking a little bit more about digital artwork as we work through some programs on the iPad. But today, the only thing I want to tell you is the software for the cutter, Silhouette Studio, only accepts certain formats. Now, probably the best format to work with is a Photoshop document or PSD. That PSD is what comes out of Photoshop. It's a proprietary file format just for Photoshop, and it holds on to everything related. If you use Photoshop, you know that sometimes there's a lot of information that goes with an image. I find that the best thing to use, though, is JPEG and PNG. Now, the reason for these two is that they're extremely small. Storage is always an issue when it comes to building artwork digitally, so these file formats make the image as small as possible. But of course, there's an effect from that too, which is by making the file format as small as possible, you take a hit on quality. Right, so a Photoshop document is 100% exactly how it looked like in Photoshop when you created it. In theory, just like the downloaded image or the improved version of that you've created. JPEG just remembers about 80-90% of that. But the file format is generally smaller. Now, the only problem with the file format being smaller in addition to that problem is that there's an effect called lossy file formats. So every single time you open a PNG, you lose a little bit of quality. Now we're talking an imperceivably small amount, but if you open an image 500 times, which is not an odd thing for me personally, you'll find that there's a decline in the quality there. So you want to, if you're gonna open an image 500 times, you want to kind of consider that. If not, for example, like uploaded images to the internet, they are shown 500 times, but they are simply referencing a copy of your image that they used. The other file format, or the third one that I like to talk about a little bit, is PNG. PNG is a lossless, so lossy and lossless, a lossless file format, which means it doesn't decline in quality at all. It's a very accepted file format, and I kind of like it. Not every graphics program allows you to export as that, but if so, go ahead. So this software, I want to just show you guys the interface really quick. Don't know how this will look on the computer, on my phone, but we'll see. So this is kind of what it looks like. It's pretty streamlined. It looks basically exactly like Photoshop. So what I wanted to show you guys is what the last thing we did, right? So I think this will give us some of the last stuff. There you go. So this one here is what the goat stencil looked like, right? When I started working on it, I don't know if you can really see there's some real small details going on, like up in this area. The cutter is not going to be able to cut that small, and it's going to tear our material apart. So, we can't have details that tight. This is a direct scan, trace of what I wanted to do. But I found as soon as I opened it that this was going to be too much detail. So you take it back into Photoshop and you take some things away. For example, there's these lines across this character's tail right here. These tail lines are not something we could cut because we'd wind up with the tail in pieces. You know what I mean? That's actually something to think about too, is like, if the cutter cuts out all of these lines, this entire character will be two pieces, will be loose. The background, which I don't know if you can see there, the whole surface is a 12 by 12 piece of acetate. If you go buy acetate at the art supply store, they will charge you a pretty good amount of it. I have a full notebook of it, and I think that thing costs about $30. And then I realized that we could use overhead projector film, which still exists at Staples and really kind of everywhere. I don't know how many people are using overhead projectors anymore, so they're very inexpensive, in some cases even free. I found them at flea markets and stuff, and in the back of art supply and office supply stores, piled up and dusty, and so I've got them for as little as $5, at the flea market as little as $1. And these are like 50 packs of overhead projector film. So it's really kind of worked out. And you'd be surprised, acetate is slightly lower mil, meaning slightly smaller weight, or slightly thinner than overhead projector film, making it a little tougher. Now, another great thing about acetate and overhead projector film is this is a sheet of plastic. So after you cut your stencil out of it and spray it, you just wipe the paint or the water off. And that means you could use that stencil, quite a few times. Have I beat stencils that are made of that? Mostly forgetting they have to stay flat, because if they get folded at all, they're kind of junk. So that's kind of what we want to do. So this machine right here will take our information from this software and give us a cut, a preview of our cut. And that cut is exactly what the machine is going to do. Let me show you a little bit of stuff about the machine. Here's some more of my crazy studio. So over here, you'll see there's quite a few tools. These are all tools that I need to use this machine and to use the airbrush. We'll talk more about those things in just a sec. I have a little problem with stickers. So this is the Silhouette Cameo. And so this product is generation 2. Now they're up to 5. I find generation 2 and 5 basically do the same thing. I don't need an LED or any of that kind of stuff. The only new improvement is an adjustable blade that you adjust from the software. That'd be fun, because over here is the physical blade. Oh, sorry about that. Don't drop your phone. Okay. So, whoop. One more flip. This is what the physical blade looks like. It's adjustable. You click it into this hole right here, that you can see. And you can click it to change its size. Obviously, the number, and this one you can adjust it with this as well. The number on the side of the blade relates to the thickness of the surface you're cutting. Right now I'm cutting acetate and a product called Sk8. These are extremely thin, so they are not a big deal. In fact, I'm actually cutting them on setting number 1. One of the problems with that particular product right there is if you cut it too deep. Sorry about that. That's our compressor turning on for the airbrush. Unfortunately, hit the switch on it, and then it has to fill for a second, or run for probably like about a minute. Right, so we're on setting 1 on the cutter. If you set it too deep, it cuts into the mat. The mat is this surface right here. This is a sticky mat that's 12 by 12. You can use 2 different kinds of material in this cutter. Number 1 would be this, which is called the cutting mat. Pretty straightforward, 12 by 12. I mostly cut 9 by 12 because that's a pretty standard size for overhead projector film. There goes the compressor. So basically, you can use that, or you can use a roll of material. Now, obviously, we couldn't use a roll of overhead projector film because it doesn't exist, but they make rolls of acetate. Now, a roll of acetate was gonna cost a bunch of money, but if you were doing a stencil that was, say, 12, was large. In fact, next week I'm painting a surfboard. This is, about 5 feet is the surface that I'll be painting on. So to make the stencil, it'll fit there. I'm going to have to do, it's about 5 by 3. So we're going to have to do 3 stencils next to each other that go top to bottom for my initial setup. I'll show you guys how that thing is going next week when we do when I'm working on that. So if you had a roll, so if you're going to do a product like that, the roll of material will be part of your overhead expenses, and you would probably use it. But I haven't used that kind of stuff that much. I do feel like the machine could absolutely do it, though. And so it's kind of cool. So in any case, you run your, you put your artwork into the program, you trace your artwork, you take a look at it, make sure that it looks pretty good. There's some minor manipulation tools within Silhouette Studio, which is the name of the program. And you can erase a little bit. It's fairly memory heavy as far as our machine goes, but but you can do it. I recommend editing the image absolutely as much as you can before you get it into the Silhouette Studio program. program. I don't feel like Silhouette Studio is an image manipulation program. It's more like an image processing program, you know, as far as adding graphics and that kind of stuff. It does have its own cut templates. You can cut a lot of things like letters and that kind of stuff. And if anyone is interested in trying the machine for a different type of application, again, come by the studio on Wednesdays and Fridays, or head out and pick one of these up. There's a couple of different ones. This one's Silhouette, which is made by the company called Silhouette. The other is called Cricut. They both do the job pretty good. Cricut one's slightly smaller, which is probably good news if you don't have a lot of space. I don't know if my studio looks big in this image right now, but this corner represents about 3/4 of the studio that I have. So space is extremely limited. This product, you know, this machine is only in this spot while it's doing its job. So in any case, I want to show you guys what we're not going to run the stencil cutter because it's fairly loud, and it takes a little while to run, you know, through cutting something. And then of course, like after that, there's a process of removing the stencil pieces from the plastic. This is what the Silhouette mat looks like. It's broken up into squares for a really simple measuring process, and then on the computer is exactly the same squares. So that gives us the opportunity to know exactly where our artwork kind of is in the virtual setup, and in, you know, what the machine is going to see. So that helps, because how big do you want your stencil to be? So this is kind of a complicated question, right? I mean, not how big you want it to be in relation to your surface, because that will be adjusted in your image manipulation program, like how big you want it to be. And that's an important number to remember because, you know, for example, skateboards are 8.5 inches wide. So you have to have your image be under 8.5 inches. But the smaller that it is on the sheet of acetate, the more of a masking problem you're going to have. I myself, and of course, like also related to the curve of the deck, you're going to create a masking problem too if your image is too large, or even the piece of acetate is too large, because sometimes a 9x12, obviously a 9x12 piece of acetate that we're cutting, or of overhead projector film, is too wide, you know, for the deck. So if I just cut that with the image in the middle, not only is that a waste of acetate, it'll overlap the curve of the deck, making it extremely difficult to get flat. Now the decks that we're using here have a double curve, right? Like, so you can see this curve, which is like the curvature of the deck itself. And then as you get to the edges, it does this secondary curve, right? And so, you know, like placing a completely flat sheet of plastic on a double curve creates a lot of wrinkles. We can't have wrinkles in spraying because the airbrush accelerates the paint, moves the paint into every other uncovered surface. So once we get our stencil down, we got to make sure we can get it absolutely as flat as possible. So one of the best ways to kind of do that, hold on one second. One of the best ways to do that is to make the stencil relatively small. It's compared to your artwork. And then you mask the rest of the surface that you're going to work on. Now, a great way to do that is to make sure that your artwork is really centered, and that it's simple, and that you simply use up a lot of paper and stuff. I'm going to show you guys how to set up, you know, the stencil. But first I wanted to show you a couple of the stencils that the machine has spitted out. Sorry about that. So this is one stencil. I don't know if you can see it. This is the negative stencil of the monkey. That helps. I thought I had made a mistake cutting that. Because what do I need the negative cutout of the monkey for? I need the inside of the monkey, which would be, you know, this piece here. Let me show you the ones I've painted. See them a little better. You know, we already looked briefly at this goat stencil, right? So this one is the negative stencil I just showed, just so the cutout, you know, if you look here, you can see that there's space, right? Now the reason there's space is because I use the outside piece first. And we're going to use the outside piece of the monkey right here to do this project. Now what you want to do is isolate as much of your surface as possible when we go to paint. Now one of the things about airbrush, which is a little on the challenging side, is that it gets really everywhere. So it's actually the good and the bad, right? So the good of airbrush is that it covers a surface really well. The bad thing is that it covers all the surface that's uncovered, even if you don't necessarily want it to. I mean, a great example of that is right here. You know, this is the board we were just talking about. And I don't know if you guys can see it, but there's a line right here. And that line is where my masking was. And so over that line is overspray from the color I used on the goat. So that is nowhere near where I painted. But the mist coming from painting here caught the edge of that surface and created it. Now, I'm sure you can imagine that that's a good thing if you're trying to create some effects or trying to give something like kind of a soft airbrushy kind of look to it. Then overspray is kind of cool. You can use it creatively, which is great, but you don't want to be stuck with it accidentally because that's honestly a huge pain. The deck here, the new decks that I'm working on are going to be painted with this product right here, which is backwards in my video. This is ultra black, a seriously black paint. It's acrylic, but it is apparently the blackest paint around. I have not used it, and I don't plan on airbrushing with it. I plan on painting everything on the deck that we didn't paint. In case I have overspray or any problems or anything like that, this is my default paint. Now the unpainted skateboard that I showed you guys, this one here, is already extremely black. So I'm thinking I won't have any kind of problem with it. One of the methods that I have to keep all of the paint kind of the same is I use Maltau products. So Maltau started as Belton, which is an airbrush company and a very popular graffiti company out of Germany. Belton was, when I was a kid, Belton was the paint to use for doing large pieces. We used to call them throw-ups. And for tags and that kind of stuff, it was a really responsive paint. It had a relatively fat cap on it. It was kind of a New York style fat cap. I used to love it. You know, it was very, very cool. And we use plenty of that when we can get it. It's a German product and we couldn't always get it. Honestly, we mostly use Krylon. I'm sure like anyone my age who painted back in the day. So Belton realized that a lot of the graffiti guys who were out doing pieces were drawing those in their black books before they would do the piece. Of course, you know, some of the guys weren't. Some of the guys were just awesome and they could just do a piece live and not have to think about it. I was not that guy. I had to draw kind of all of my stuff ahead of time. And so your black book, you'd want to do it in color as much as possible. And then you get out to the wall and the colors are completely different because you have to go with whatever can color. You know, there's, I don't know, 30 yellows, right? And so you want to use kind of the same one, especially if you're looking for a color effect that you had in the book. So what Maltau realized that they were missing was sort of a graffiti-based paint marker. I'm sure anybody who's ever spent time with me knows that I have a spiel about markers, and we're gonna have a week with just about paint markers. So I won't bore you too much with my stuff. But in any case, paint markers are these days refillable. You know, that little bottle I showed you is a 10 milliliter, 30 milliliter container of the ink that's inside the paint markers. That's a great thing, you know, because back in the day, you kill a paint marker, you throw it away. And so also this paint is probably the best consistency of paint I've ever used in an airbrush. One of the things that's like really challenging about the airbrush is consistency, or viscosity is extremely important. Otherwise you wind up clogging the airbrush and having it not work, or getting paint onto your surface that's too thin. And if it's too thin, it could run, and that's not what we want. You know, one of the things about airbrush that's really significant, and, you know, a big part of what we're going to do today, is that the stencil is a finite space. Not like we painted it with a liquid media. We sprayed a dry media relatively directly to the surface, and we want it to dry as thinly as possible. And so that's what we need airbrush to do. So if the paint doesn't atomize the way that it's supposed to, then it doesn't work, you know. And then if you're doing that on a surface that's a finished surface, or the product, you know, the project that's, you know, for a client, you're going to have a real problem, because anytime you wipe up paint after you drip it, you know, the surface is honestly never the same. There's some repair methods. Maybe this new black will like cover everything, but so far, you know, it's limited. So in any case, that liquid paint I'm going to use in the airbrush, and it totally works, you know, great. And then when I'm finished, say I miss a couple of spots, or you know, I don't like the coverage in a given area, I can take the paint marker, the same color, and color in that area, and it looks like I did it with the airbrush. Now there's a brush stroke effect, but if you're not like right on top of it, you know, you're not going to notice so much. And that's a great editing, you know, kind of thing. And not to bore you guys with continuing looking at the test board, but on the test board, if you look close, you can see the stroke on that goat is black paint marker. And then in these white areas right here, those lines were too small for the airbrush. So we just put those in with the paint marker. I have some literally 1 millimeter paint tips by Unapasca. And they do the job like really, really well. They're like along the lines of the old felt tip markers. Right, see that? Really, really small. So they allow you to do whatever you want, all the way up to, you know, markers of this size, you know, for working on, you know, larger surfaces. I imagine I'll use those in the skateboard. So in any case, we got our 2 stencils cut, and now the deal is setting it up, you know. So this surface here, give me 1 second to turn this so I can show you guys. All right. So this is called a Mayo stand. This is like a hospital kind of thing. That I don't know, I got somewhere. Can't really remember where I got it from. So all of this stuff here is sort of my tools and stuff that I use related to laying out the product. So we're going to try to check that out. Show you a little bit more of it. Oh, guess we can't do it that way. So here is the deck that we're going to use. Now this particular deck has this really cool sort of reflective sticker on it. I don't know if you guys can see it. So see this thing? You know, it's kind of diamond platey. I can't remember what that sticker is called. And it's really cool. Now, what I wanted was a full deck that I could do a couple of experiments on and kind of see what happens. So I didn't paint totally over it. I kind of gave it like a brush strokey kind of surface so that we could take a look at it. First thing that we have to do is lay out our negative stencil, right? So I usually get a spot here in the middle of the deck as much as I can. This one's like a little bit big compared to this board is a little bit smaller than the last board was. So you just sheet it over so that you can see the whole stencil on your surface. You guys see this okay? All right. So once we get this thing down, we got to make sure we don't have anything popping up, right? So these things, you know, are ratchet bits, which I myself am totally tool challenged, and I will honestly never use these. But all around flea markets and stuff like that, people have toolboxes filled with these and hate to have them around. These are actually the perfect tool to use to hold a stencil down. They're small, so you can kind of fit them anywhere that you think might come up a little bit. I try to use as many small ones as I can, but some big areas like over here, you know, in the line of the monkey's hip and stuff, you definitely have, you know, some room to get some of these things into place. And you really want to put as many as you have, you know what I mean? Like, I found a box of these about a week ago in my own stuff, and I find that if you put quite a few on, it makes a real big difference, especially in areas that are sort of by themselves, you know, like areas that are out here alone. See if I can get this a little closer to you guys so you can see it a little better. So there we go. You know, we got most of this guy weighted down pretty good. We want to make sure that we don't have any spots that air could get underneath the stencil. Now, one of the things about the airbrush, which is cool, is you're spraying straight down, right? So you're not, you know, going sideways. If we went sideways, we would get under the stencil in this area right here. Same is true all around it. You know, there's a lot of people who sit down to do airbrush. I think that's awesome if you can get away with it. Personally, I cannot. I have to stand up to stencil because I feel like I don't have the same kind of control that I would have if I was standing, you know. So we're going to get ready to do this thing. I just wanted to show you guys a little bit of the tools that we're going to use to do today's project. So this is a Grex airbrush. Grex is an American tool company. The industry standard in airbrushes is called Iwata. Awesome product, really, really nice. I just found these guys and I happen to like them a little bit more. I like having this big, soft kind of pad and this big button. So I wanted to tell you guys a little bit of how the airbrush works. I'm not going to make you guys listen to my whole spiel about airbrushes because, you know, you guys are free. But anyway, I want to explain exactly how the airbrush works. And the first thing I want to say is that, you know, airbrushing is the world's oldest art creation media. Everybody kind of thinks that sculpture and that kind of stuff, is the oldest type of artwork, but really it's airbrush. Now, accelerated airbrush, like a machine, is obviously came a lot later, but in the caves of La Croix in France, the oldest cave paintings on Earth, are examples of accelerated painting. So these guys took bones, right? They were hollow, and they stuffed them with colored pigments and animal fat, and they blew through these tubes as hard as they could, for example, while holding their hand against the wall. This outlined their hand and referenced themselves for out history. I don't know how long ago it was. I think like 30,000 years ago. This is accelerated paint, so that makes him airbrushing. Airbrushing, the way we're working with it, really started in the 1880s with foot pump airbrush equipment. They used it in the sign painting industry, photo editing, you know, as far as cleaning up a photo a little bit. But mostly it was about signs, right? And then I think it was in the 30s that Anais Iwata started producing these products. I don't know a ton about the history of Iwata, but I find it to be a tremendous company. They do great products. They make really, really nice stuff. I just happen to like the Grex a little bit more. So in any case, how an airbrush works is pretty simple and kind of straightforward, but it can be a mystery if you don't know. You know what I mean? So let me tell you a little bit about it. The first thing is that the most important part of the airbrush is the needle. The needle goes all the way through a long tube in the airbrush and out to the front. This particular airbrush has a magnetic needle guard on it. Magnetic is really great because that's something you would absolutely lose. For me, every time I airbrush, I lose something. And if you go in here and take this cap off, this is actually the needle cap, right? So this is where our needle is coming through. I don't know if you can see it, but it's right there, and it's extremely small. One of the big problems with airbrushing is bending that needle. If the needle is bent, it doesn't fit through this hole, and the needle's task in this hole is to hold the paint inside, this part of the airbrush, really this part of the airbrush. So a lot of artists are cleaning the tip of their airbrush sort of like methodically throughout the painting process. I will absolutely be doing that today also. I don't know if you guys can see this right here, but there's the needle sticking out. And I mostly paint like this, but the guard on this one is called a crown cap. And it's kind of like two pieces, so you can still clean your needle a little if you have to, and then being magnetic, we can put it back. So the needle is the most important part. This spot right here is where our paint cup is going to screw into. For this job, I'm using a pretty small paint cup. This one has some white on it because I just painted the white on this thing. We're probably going to use white in this airbrush first. The other thing about this airbrush is it's called a double action airbrush, and this is the rest of it, so you can see all of the airbrush. Double action means down for air, back for paint. Now, if you notice, I don't know if you guys can see it, but the needle is articulating right there. That's it pulling out of the needle cap that we looked at over here and allowing this paint to, which is down the cup and filling this tube on the front of the airbrush to get the air. And the air is coming up through this tube right here. I can show you what that looks like. So this is called a quick connect for the airbrush. Really helpful because behind that is a threaded connector. If you're switching airbrushes, which I'm going to do a couple of times in our process here, you don't want to have to screw them on and screw them off. You know, not only does it take a few minutes, but if you move the airbrush like this, the paint spills out of it. I have a cap on it, but the cap has a hole in it for the purpose of venting some of the air. You know, we're sucking air, you know, we're pushing air through like this, and it's of course filling this entire area. The paint doesn't bubble because the paint is normally, you know, on its way out, but if you tip it, you can easily pour it through the cap. So this quick connect, this is the other end of the quick connect. Just click into place, and now we're, you know, hot, or whatever you want to call it. You can see a little bit of water in there misting out. So all we do is we fill this reservoir with paint. In this first pass, it's going to be white. And as I told you, or as I said, you know, we're using Maltau paint. And this one is a 30 milliliter. This white is called Signal White. They have Signal White and Signal Black. I think both of these related to the locomotive industry. Maltau has some kind of predisposition with trains. If you guys are interested in graffiti at all, the sorry about that. Maltau owns a train, and every so often they have some of the world's most famous graffiti artists come and paint on that train. One of my favorite is Mad C. She's a really unbelievable painter, kind of a graphic painter. But every so often, like maybe I think it's every 2 or 3 months, they paint the entire train and have folks, you know, paint big pieces on it. Totally worth checking out, you know, totally worth it. They also come out with a magazine every month, and which you can get on issue. And, you know, you should totally check them out. You know, I love the paints. You know, we'll talk more about the paints themselves when we do markers. So all you want to do is pour some of this paint in here. Whoa, don't miss. Oh, just need a little bit more than that. Over here, I have some of my other airbrush stuff. You know, on the side here is my airbrush holder. Some other products that I need that I'm going to bring in to our area right now. And I just need a tool. Sometimes the paints stick in the lid there. So I have an old airbrush needle, which old airbrush needles are kind of valueless because if you have it around, you're going to think it's not old. Stick it back in your airbrush and it's not going to work. The problem with airbrush needles is the very, very tip gets bent. The impossibly tiny, you know, 0.001 tip gets paint in it, and then it dries on us. So drying means it won't come out. Right? So we add a little bit of paint in there. At this point, I'm going to put my gloves on because already within a few seconds, I've got paint on me. All of the products that we're going to use ultimately are covered in paint. The gloves that I'm using right now are these ones right here, which are nitrite gloves. If you're allergic to latex, you know, they're not bad. I mean, they're latex free. I have kind of big hands, so I have a hard time finding gloves that fit me. These guys put out an, twice upside down, put out an extra large. I recommend, you know, whenever possible, if you're airbrushing, or I find creating a lot of the artwork that I create, collages and stuff, like I get glue on my hands. And if you get glue on your surface, not only do you pick up pieces that aren't glued down, you get dried glue in different places, and you have to get it off. A lot of the artwork I'm working with here is really thin newsprint. If you rub it to get glue off, you also rub the ink out of it, and then it's no good. So once you got gloves on, if you're doing this project with me, you can check it out, and we'll kind of go from here. So now I'm just going to move the camera so we can set it up so you guys can see us painting. The compressor makes some noise, so I don't want you to, I hope you guys can hear me over it, but it won't take long. You know, we're just going to kind of work it out. You guys see that okay? I hope so. There you go. Looking at it really close like this, we can notice that there is a piece that's kind of sticking up a little, you know, that we don't want sticking up. We got to adjust these guys because this close, you can see the stuff that's going to be trouble. Now we did pretty good getting all of our stuff down. I think that most of it is okay. Just give it a quick once over so that we don't find out while we're painting. Another thing to watch out for is having stuff too close to the edge. You know, if this guy, we're going to be blowing air paint on here. So if this guy slides off, you know, could distract you, make you try to grab it. I'm always doing that kind of stuff. So maybe we'll switch these two guys. Yeah, there we go. That guy might stay. All right, looks pretty good. You want to make sure none of your sockets are blocking any of the places you want to paint, right? And I think we're looking pretty good. You know, the tail looks pretty good. Maybe we need one over there. I think that guy's going to roll off of there. We'll put this one. Another good use for airbrush stuff like caps and stuff will be this part of the painting process. All right, so we're going to get started painting. So if you guys can't hear me, it only takes a few minutes to paint this surface. And then once we're done with that, I'll come back to talking. So like I was saying, I mostly paint with the back off. The airbrushes have a metal back that looks like this, has this wheel on the back, and if you were painting something you wanted to be exactly the same size, you could set that, and that's how far your needle could travel, right? And so this guy goes on right here and covers all that back end, and it'll stop the needle from going too far back. I very rarely use that because I don't do a lot of custom lettering. Because that would be a very, probably a pretty classic use for that. I have this notebook here from the awesome event Success Fest, which if you guys don't know about it, you should go check it out. One year that a notebook company thought this was a good notebook. You'll notice the graphic goes all the way to the edge. Wasn't really sure what I could possibly do with the notebook you can't put notes on. So I took them and they couldn't return them. So I decided I would keep them. And one great thing about them is that you can test your airbrush on them. One of the things you have to do is get your airbrush kind of going a little bit. And an important thing to know about airbrushing is you never want to straight up spray because it spits a little bit, right? So as you can see here on the end, the needle we were talking about, it's going to collect a little bit of paint there. And so if you turn it on over your surface, it's going to spit. And a great example is here, once we get it going and we know that our paint is moving and that we're kind of good to go, each time I start, it spits a little. This is with the needle all the way back, no paint. Still has paint. So we start over here with the air, and then we move it into our graphic. Now for me, the first thing I do is hit the edges because this is where the stencil, our stencil is most important, is getting our edges filled in. You guys see that okay? So we just stencil in as much of these edges as we can. Now I can see this piece right here moving. So you just hold it down so that you don't get anything under it. And as I just said, you don't want to spray over the surface because you get some spitting. Now, one of the things I was just talking about is dry tip, right? So we get a little bit of paint stuck on this tip and it doesn't spray quite as well. Get it going though again and we're pretty much okay, you know. One extreme with the airbrush is cleaning and dealing with it getting clogged and stuff. These things are one of the really negative aspects of working with the airbrush, but you can overcome them after a little while. You find yourself not hating cleaning it as much as you do the first time. And you probably get better at it each time too, you know. I find I get a little better at it each time I do it. This is a way to clean your needle really quick. That's one of the other reasons I keep the back off. You can reach, this is the pin or the spring that holds your airbrush in place. You'll see how much white I spilled on this guy already. Well, another reason to use water-based paints. You can throw this thing in the dishwasher, in the sink and rinse all this kind of stuff off. So again, see how much spitting just that much was? Part of that is articulating my needle and pulling it back and forth through the paint. But a lot of it too is just the, you know, the nature of the thing. Might be getting a little low on paint here. Got to add a little bit. Hold on one sec. All right, we're back in there. If you look here too, you can see a little lift going right there. I'm going to move one of these bigger guys over here while I'm painting that spot. Oh, a little heavier. Just switching over to a different airbrush. This one is also a Grex. This one is obviously a pistol grip style one. What I like about this one, it has the cup is on the side and you can rotate it. So as you work like this with the airbrush, your paint is still, your paint cup is still facing up. Same type of quick connect on it as the other one. Makes that noise. Good to go. So with this one, it's also a double action airbrush, just a little bit different, right? So we got a little bit of a bigger cup there, you can see. Has the same adjuster back here if you wanted to set a positive stop. This one is also double action. Now the question that I've asked when I first got this guy was, what does double action mean on a pistol grip airbrush? As you push the needle, the trigger, that's just air. You can actually feel a spot right there, which is before your needle starts to move. Once your needle starts to move, you're painting, you know? So it does have air. Now the purpose of having air is not to have air. Number two is to be able to dry paint. You know, once you paint like a tight area, you can spray air on it to dry it really quick. This is super relevant if you're painting something 2 times in a row, say, or there's a really small spot that you just want to fill in. So we're going to go back to painting over here a little bit. See what you guys think. Can you see that okay? All right. Same thing. We want to start over here on the board. This guy's working real good. So we just paint. Get up this guy's tail. Hold that down a little. Once you get, you know, your background filled in pretty good, all you gotta do is lightly fill in the middle. What we don't want is to tint the colors that are on top of this one white. Really, this white is about isolating the image from the background. So we're just sort of spitting some paint on here. You know what I mean? As you go, you have to watch, because sometimes the angle of your airbrush sprays paint in a way you don't want it to. Little dry tip going on. Oops. So that's a pretty good first coat to get on. We need to do a little bit more up on his tail. Just got to try to get this cap off with rubber gloves on. So we just pull this tip out a little. Take this back off of this one too, same as the last one. We can pop our needle a little bit to make sure we're getting all of our paint. Take a look, we still got paint in there. Tip it. So we hit this guy's tail a little. We're going to move some of our weights so that they help us keep the tail down. That one's a good one. All right, and then we paint this guy's tail. Well. All right, a little bit more around his ear. All right, that looks pretty good. So the next thing that we have to do is, we got to clean out the paint that we just put into the airbrush, and we got to switch to our next color. Our next color in this particular project is going to be lobster. The first test on the test board, which again is this one, first I did this lettering. I did that in lobster. I think it looks pretty good, but it didn't pop off the background as much as I kind of wanted it to. This one has white sprayed under it, but it's still, not quite as red as I kind of wanted. Now this one, I'm more than a little colorblind, so I was trying to figure out what color this sort of was, from the artwork that I showed you guys. So if you look at these two next to each other, I personally have no idea if they're the same color. My wife says that this guy is burnt orange and this guy is not. So what I felt like was the best was the color lobster. I can show you what that looks like. Another great thing about Maltal is that they have refills that are that size, 30 milliliters, like I told you. And then they have this one, which is 180 milliliters. So this is refill for 1 million markers. So this is the color that is. I don't know if you guys can really kind of see that. So that was as close as I could get to orange, burnt orange. Not 100% the right color, but luckily I went to the client and said, this is the color that I have. And he said he didn't care as long as it was red. Didn't care about that specific color. This is very rare with clients. Usually clients really care about their stuff. In fact, a funny story about Wayside is I suggested that I could do some flyers or some graphic projects for my employer. And the marketing person said, well, the person that does our artwork already knows our green. And that was a completely legitimate thing, understanding the green you guys kind of work with. As a side note, there's a thing called Pantone. This is a company, worldwide company, whose job is to catalog all of the colors in the world. So, for example, the grass in Norway is this color. These guys have a swatch of that color. And they create a reference number based on how much chroma there is in a given color. So there's an entire catalog at Pantone, I think it's Pantone.com, that will find any color you possibly want and give you the code for that. So whatever person, whatever client you have, whatever color they want, you can go on Pantone and you can find that color specifically for them. And that's great when your clients are really specific about something like that. This guy luckily really didn't care that much, I guess. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to clean the airbrush a little bit. First thing we're going to use for that is this thing. This thing is an airbrush cleaning bottle. You can see I have like a brand new one that's in, you know, great shape and, you know, stuff like that. This gets pretty messy. I'm sure you can imagine. What I do with this is you put a filter in this side. You put the airbrush in this side. The airbrush blows against a small piece of plastic. I don't think I can get it open. That sticks down behind this. So it hits that and runs down. Fills this thing with airbrush paint or water, whatever we're doing to clean our brush out, and lets the air that we're pumping into it out. It always reminds me of a Hawaiian punch can. If you put one hole in it, you can pour it out all day. Nothing comes out of it unless you shake it real hard. If you put two holes, it allows the air to come out, and it allows the Hawaiian punch to come out into your mouth. So the same thing happens with this. I used to joke around with kids, if you cover this with your finger, this glass will eventually explode. Mostly people laugh, but absolutely it would happen. Now the airbrush doesn't have enough pressure to probably do that. The pressure the airbrush creates is called PSI, but at the bottom line, I don't think it would have enough. So what we do is we take the airbrush that we were using, we put our little airbrush cleaning bottle. Sorry about that, you guys. Airbrush cleaning bottle right here. Take our cap off our airbrush. We were basically out of paint. One of the top things you're going to need with your airbrush, if you're using water-based paint, is a squirt bottle. This one's kind of fun because we swirl dipped it. We'll be doing some of that with toys in the coming weeks. So what I do is I fill this guy up, you know, about a quarter weight, really wherever my paint stain in the cup is. And then, you know, before you put it in, you have to remember that you took your cap off, because if you stick it in to that hole without your needle guard on, you can bend your needle. Fortunately, I've misplaced my needle guard, so I'm going to have to just be careful. Oh, here it is. You know, being careful of the needle is one of the absolute most difficult parts of airbrushing. I usually say if you buy an airbrush, buy a couple of needles with it, because if they go bad, you can replace them on the fly, because nothing is worse than being halfway through creating a project like this and realizing your needle is bent and it's going to spray sideways the whole time. Or worse, a bent needle won't stop the paint, right? It's like the Dutch boy keeping his finger in the dam. If the finger is only halfway in the dam, water comes out, which means paint comes out as soon as you touch your trigger. Now the trigger on this one, like I said, the halfway is air, but it still would be air and paint if the cap, if the needle wasn't all the way in. So that's kind of the deal with that. So we got our cap on, we got our water in there, kind of mix it around a little bit. Depending on how long you've been painting for on a day. You want to scrub it out or something like that. I keep like a little scrubby around or some tools to scrape it out. I don't think we need to do that today because we just painted with it, 5 minutes ago. So we put the guy in here and we spray all of our whole cup of water into there. Good thing to do is to watch the paint that you're spraying. Make sure it's coming out. I sometimes pull it like this and hit the side, see if it's coming out. That's messy. I don't know if you guys can see the vapor coming out of this, but vapor is good. That's atomized paint coming out of our cup. There we go. Sometimes with this particular airbrush, you have to kind of find sort of what I guess I would call like a sweet spot to get the paint coming out. Airbrushes are a little bit like people. They all have their own kind of personality, and you have to kind of sort of deal with that. I find each company does things a little bit different. I feel like I have airbrushes from practically every company in the world that makes them, in an effort to find what's right for you. One of the problems is pencils and other art media. You got to find one that connects with you and that you like. This is like finding, your best paintbrush. You know, if you find it, you're going to use that one. And so that's kind of the deal. So each one, this airbrush specifically is really different than the rest of the airbrushes that I've used. You know, this one we talked about earlier, this is pretty much like the standard airbrush setup, right? You know, like, I mean, this is a little bit of jazzed up version of it, but basically this is it. So your airbrush always is like that, and you're always working like that. I think that's fine, but I was trying to be different. I recently went to an airbrush conference, and pretty much everybody was using Iwata products and using that style, the double action sort of, you know, like pencil style. I think that's wicked cool, and there was some hugely famous folks there doing it, and no one was using this one. I don't know. I feel like it just makes me different. Now you could say it's not as good, and that's definitely possible. You can pay kind of whatever you want for an airbrush. There's some like powder coated black airbrushes from Coast Airbrush that are completely beautiful. They're $500 though. And if you don't do professional painting, it's extremely difficult to make that back. You know, invest what you can, spend what you can. You know, there's airbrush out there for everybody, and literally every budget. Hold on. So one of the things I'm doing right now is let it dry. You really want to let paint dry in between. You don't have to, airbrushes are, the paint we're using is extremely thin. So you don't really have to dry as long as an acrylic painting, obviously. But you want to let it dry, you know, a few minutes. Because what we don't want to do is be hitting, you know, wet paint and pushing it around or saturating the surface. You know, one of the things about airbrushing, which is extremely hard, and the same problem with spray painting, is that it's really easy to overcoat your surface. You know, like really easy, especially with the mist being so thin. Depending on your lighting, now my lighting in here is pretty good. You can't always see where the airbrush is painting. You know, like sometimes you're off. And a lot of times I start it on the paper that I was telling you guys about, you know, the little sketchbook, and I partially to know where I'm painting and where the nozzle is going to spit. So like I said, each airbrush is a little different. Maybe we could take 2 seconds to talk about sort of the history of airbrushes or the currently available airbrushes I have used. I guess I could show you guys some, but I don't know how relevant that is, honestly. What I'll do is I'll just tell you about them. So at Harbor Freight, the inexpensive tool store, they have a product, an airbrush product called Master. This is a double action airbrush with a needle and everything like that, totally ready to go. They sell compressors there. A pancake compressor at Harbor Freight is about 99 bucks. The airbrush that I just mentioned is 20 bucks. Comes with an extra needle, an extra cap, like, you know, a few things. But it's a relatively low quality airbrush. And one of the things you can tell looking at it right away is that the needle is really large. The smaller your needle is, the more serious of a detail that you could do. Now, this particular airbrush is absolutely not made for detail. It's made for filling in a letter stencil on your road bar or whatever, like your, you know, sort of regular tool guy would need an airbrush for, because it's real basic. And then a great thing about it is if you drop it on the ground, you throw it away because it's 20 bucks, you know, so it's not too bad. The compressor, there's a couple of things about compressors. You just heard mine. It's not crazy loud. We can still speak over it. The compressor I had before was made by a company called Silent Air, which I think is a brilliant company, and I have other products by them are great. But this one, I bought it and it's extremely loud. So I called them and I said, your company's called Silent Air. How can it be so loud? And she said, we're a compressor company and we make silent compressors. That's not one of them. So that was on me. You know, I screwed that up. So when I was out in Anaheim last year, I was checking out, you know, some compressors with the folks at Coast Airbrush, which, by the way, if anybody's looking for anything related to airbrushing, Coast is the way to go, with the exception of this Master that I just mentioned. And the airbrush compressor they had out there ran much slower because it had quieter, and it ran less because it had 2 large tanks for air. So the deal with most compressors, pancake compressor as well, is that while your compressor runs, it fills a tank with air. This tank is what you're going to work off of, and every time the tank goes below a certain amount, you know, that the compressor has set, it's going to turn on and fill that compressor up again. Now, the great thing is that you don't get a pulse in your airbrush because you're actually using paint after the compressor used it. On standard airbrush compressors, which I'm sure everybody has seen, I can show you one. I'll show you one right here. So this small unit right there is a small air compressor. These are extremely inexpensive. They absolutely do the job. If you were just starting out, you could probably get one of those for like $35, $40. They will absolutely do the job. They fit in most people's place, but they're relatively loud. And they don't have a tank, which means you're getting the air right from the diaphragm that's moving. So a diaphragm is going like this. What do you think your air is gonna do? Your air does that too. So this creates more spitting and makes you paint in a slightly different way because you're working with this sort of a pulse. So I don't like those type of compressors at all. Now the pancake compressor we mentioned is unbelievably loud. You would not want to use that compressor inside. You can't talk over it. It does have a significant, PSI. It does the job. I think those compressors are really made for air tools, where you don't care how loud it is in your garage, or for filling basketballs, filling up car tires. I think these things, that's what they're made for. When I got mine, I wound up running an extremely long hose. And I got to my airbrush, started working, it was working great, and then it started to rain. So finding the right compressor for you is going to be significant about how the process of airbrushing kind of goes. This compressor right here is called a California, I think California Products. Really works pretty well, and it wasn't that expensive. I mean, like, it depends on how much you airbrush. This particular compressor was around $200, so that's not really that bad. They kill you on shipping from California. Just kidding. I think shipping was free. And those Coast guys are really, really, really great guys. So I think that's probably it as far as cleaning the airbrush goes, and we can check out our paint and see where we're at with the white. Looks pretty dry, not getting any paint really on the gloves, a little bit. Let's check out one that definitely doesn't have anything. Yeah, a little bit. So we probably give it about 3 minutes, or 2 minutes, something like that. So we could talk a little bit more about the programs. So this program is designed for anyone that wants to, listen to me talk, I suppose, or that anybody wants to learn what we do here, right? And so once the health crisis is over, we'll be back in the studio at Tempo every week doing this type of work with young adults. We have a couple of folks that bring in a chicken, and our chicken is really awesome. We think of her as a therapy chicken. Her name is Abba. She has a much more complicated name. Ilsa and Jean will definitely correct me on that. But we have this chicken that comes in, Big Bertha, her sister comes in, and then Magpie, the pigeon comes in. Magpie is a little bit different than the other guys, but having a pigeon in the studio while we're working is by far one of the coolest things I've ever been a part of in my life, and an awesome upgrade, to the experience of being in the studio. I think it's a great time. I don't know if kids come for the chicken, but there are days that I'm coming for the chicken. Tempo is a great spot. Also, if you folks haven't heard of Tempo, Tempo is a young adult resource center, and they do a lot of stuff for the young adults out there. The first thing and most significant, I think, is just giving young adults a place to be that's safe and clean, and positive, in a really tangible kind of way. Most of the young adults I've worked with there are there, sort of to stay out of trouble, to pass the time there, but in a positive, kind of a way. Tempo maintains a laundry and a computer lab. And both of these are used significantly by almost every young adult that comes into the space. They also have peer mentors. They're called transitional facilitators. These folks help young adults with whatever they kind of need. Mostly, I would say they're working with young adults that are in crisis, homeless, having a drug problem, police and court involvement. And these guys get involved and help them in a huge way. Recently, I think about 2 years ago, they got a grant to work with young adults who are struggling with homelessness. I know they have a person completely dedicated to that. And then they have a system of outreach that's going out in the community and helping to spread the word that the resource center exists, and sort of to find young adults that kind of need our help and their help and their services. When I started at Wayside, I started at Tempo. I find it's a great program, and they're doing really important stuff for young adults. And one of my favorite things about it is it's, in my mind, I call it a don't ask, don't tell program, which is that we're not asking you to, where you come from or what's going on with you as an intake. Anybody can walk in the door. There's no insurance. There's nothing. You just come in the door. As long as you're between, I think it's 16 and 26, you're okay to be there. And any services are there. They also have a small food pantry that gets donations from Whole Foods and a few other places. Weekly, they take kids to the supermarket and to the United Way food pantry, which is also pretty, helping in a big way for these young adults. And they're just doing great work. I find that I can't recommend them enough. My friend my friend Oscar Lataverde is one of the TFs there, and he's maybe one of the coolest guys that I've ever worked with. Really serious guy. So I'm thinking by now, this silly junk I've been telling you guys, our white paint is probably dry enough. Let's check it again. I think we're kind of good. That seems to be dry white paint as opposed to wet white paint. So a great thing about going from white to red, is that you don't really have to get all the white out because we're switching to a color that's darker than white. And probably overspraying it by a little. You know what I mean? So like I said, this next time we're going to use this color Lobster, which is right here. If anybody's looking for Maltau products, you can get them at Dick Blick. Really good space to get them from. If you want to see them, if you're looking for a better deal, Dick Blick is not the most inexpensive place to get them. I would get them from Maltau themselves if you feel like it. Or in Seattle, there's a company called Art Primo. They make a lot of their own stuff, and they call themselves a graffiti supply store. I really like that. So I would recommend going to those guys, artprimo.com. They have basically everything, that you need for graffiti. They don't have a ton of stuff for airbrush. It's kind of not about that. But they do have a ton of stuff for graffiti, if that's your thing. So now we got our red paint in here. Like I said, this is Lobster. So this is going to be coat 2 of with the airbrush. And you see we already got some color in there. And it's kind of a rusty color. Now I'm colorblind, but that's what they tell me. Kind of a rusty color. So here we go. Same thing as before. I'm probably not going to be able to talk a ton while I'm doing this. But I will talk to you guys when I finish. Whoops. Sometimes you have to break out the big guns. I need a couple more sockets, to get everything down. You saw how much I had to put my hand down when we sprayed it the last time. And I'm not sure you probably can't see it from there, but there's quite a few spots where the stencil's lifting up. And like I said, this is related to the double curve of the deck. We're trying to chase out a curve, a rounded object with a perfectly flat, straight object, which would be our stencil. This is a little challenging. Probably one of the hardest parts of airbrushing is to just get everything down where you want it to be and try not to get, under it. Another thing you want to think about while airbrushing is don't take this stencil off at any time. You will not get it back into the same place. I don't care how good you are. Some people use registration marks, which would be like you make a small hole in each of the corners. So when you put the stencil back, you can place it on those same corners. That definitely works. But if you're not going to do that and you think you can just eye it, please don't. Also, as we keep going, the inside piece of this stencil that we produced with the silhouette is going to place right in here. And if this doesn't move, then we get it right where we want over this board. Sorry about that, you guys. Got to keep hydrated. It's hard to talk for a long time. All right, so now we're gonna go in and hit it with the red, or with the lobster. Same thing I said. You want to kind of keep as much of your clothes out of the way as possible. Like I said, the gloves. Look at how much paint I have on the gloves already. Good thing I was wearing gloves. You know what I mean? Obviously, it'd be difficult to use this to see if the red is working. I mean, you can, but I mostly use something white. Now, that one of the things about airbrush is it's subtle. You know, it's about subtlety. You know, like you don't want to spray that much each second. You know, you want to try to like feather it out kind of so that you get kind of like a soft, you know, kind of effect. We paint the surface a couple of times, so that will give us the saturation or the coverage. You know, the same I was doing with the white. You don't really have to cover everything because all we really need is the white to punch out the edge so that the red stands out, because we're going to cover all this red, all this white with red, right? So just make sure, you know, that it covers enough to place it off the board a little. Same thing. Oh man, what is that? Hold on one second. That was kind of a lot of paint. I think I must have leaned or something. All right. Cool. So you can put your needle cap back on, like I was saying, but you have to remember that there's a pretty good chance that you're going to have to take it off again to keep cleaning the paint off your needle, right? So what we're going to do, again, is we're going to tip our cup back a little. You can see that, right? And then we're just going to start painting. You guys see okay? Whoa, what are you dripping for? A little bit of drip going on. So same thing we were saying, you kind of feather it out. You know, try to hit your edges from an angle. Might have run out of paint that fast. Yep. Always want to put, you know, you can always put less paint than you think you're going to need because you really can't put it back. You know what I mean? So feel free to use less. Doesn't really matter. You can fill your brush 20 times. No one's here watching you. See, like that was killing the brush, killing the paint again. Now, if you look around right here, you can see that some of the paint is a little thick through this area. So we go in here and we dry it a little. Helps to move the paint around. Give us a little bit of a less saturation, right? So now that we got basically this whole surface, whoops, I'm supposed to put another couple drops of paint in. Those bottles work extremely well. You know, these lobster bottles, these 180 milliliter bottles, they work extremely well to fill stuff, but there's an important thing to learn, which is don't shake them. Because I think there's an impetus from all of us to shake any paint that we ever pick up. This paint doesn't mix, doesn't need to be mixed. So you want to just sort of aerate it, which is to move it back and forth like this, instead of shaking it. Because if you shake it, when you go to pour it out, it's just bubbles. And that's not what we're looking for. You know, we're looking for something that's paint. All right. So I think we got some pretty good coverage with that lobster. So now we got to let that one dry for a couple of minutes. Whoa. Sorry about that. I'll take a moment to show you guys some of the equipment we've been talking about. So over here, we have a really great airbrush holder. I find that this particular airbrush is really hard to find a holder for. There's a lot of different airbrush holders out there. They all do the single airbrush job really well. But these odd shapes, like where the handle is, if you look at where the handle is on my Grex, it fits through this hole in the bottom, which is a big deal because the other ones, you know, don't. Over here, this is the reducer that we're using, or the airbrush cleaner. This helps wipe out anything we have as far as paint goes, cleans it up, you know, that kind of stuff. And then just a few other things I wanted to show you guys. So we already talked about this tank right here. That's just for cleaning the airbrush up. And then a few other tools that are over here. You know, you see the monkey stencil right there that we're going to use. I don't know if you can see it because it's kind of on the clear side. This particular monkey was a lot of work to get all the little tiny pieces. If you look close, you can see all these pieces that had to be pulled out. You do that with a pin, or for me, I use an old airbrush needle. Or one time I used to use this product over here. This is my terrible toolbox of incredible amounts of junk. In any case, I use like a pin. And that pin really helps me do like almost everything. So I would say always create tools if you can, and try to keep them forever. So some of the other tools, whoa, sorry about that. Some of the other tools we use over here are a Leatherman. Rarely need the multi-tools in it, but need the needle nose pliers to pull the needle out occasionally, especially if it gets really dry. You'll notice the blue here is traditional painter tape. I use that because they make airbrush tape, and it's like 3 times as much, where like painter's tape is really inexpensive. Also over here is this brayer. This is for printmaking, but if you take a look at it, it's really a hard rubber, tube inside of this holder. Now that works great to put paint on a lino cut or something like that, but it also works really well to push this, push whatever media we're trying to cut in the cutter, like this right here. You can really press it down flat. Now this surface here is sticky, so that you can, it's really sticky. I'm not sure what they use because it lasts for a really long time. But if your paper doesn't stick really good on this cutting mat and it moves, then it folds up under the knife. And there's really no way to fix that. And then it'll just start tearing your stencil kind of apart. So that's not what we're looking for. And so that's some of the tools that we have to use. And then over here, we just had talked about the X-Acto knife that I use. I use a lot of paper towels. Some folks hang a paper towel rack on the wall and paint on that because you can keep tearing it off. And it lasts kind of a long time, especially if you're interested in learning things like lettering or anything like that, because lettering is really about the stroke of your hand, that kind of stuff. And the more you can get used to the fluid nature, sorry about that. Yeah. Sorry, I dropped the phone. As soon as you can get used to the fluid nature of creating letters, like the swipe, the movement, there's a lot to airbrush lettering. I don't do a lot of lettering. I mostly am doing traditional artwork kind of, or modern-y kind of comic artwork using the airbrush. I wanted to show you guys this last tool because I find it to be my most important one. This is a old 3mm airbrush needle that is bent. I don't expect you to be able to see that. But once this one is bent real good, drop the airbrush on the tip, which I do occasionally. So it was totally junk. So I coated this thing with some brightly colored duct tape. Excuse me. Some brightly colored duct tape, and this winds up becoming the default tool of 1,000,001 uses. This guy is really good to help clean out the airbrush, really good to pull out the pieces of the stencil that we were just talking about, really good to do 101 uses. So in the event you're airbrushing and your needle goes bad, which sadly happens all the time, create a tool like this because you'd be surprised how often you use it in continuing to airbrush. So I'm not sure. I wonder if our lobster is dry enough yet. Let's take a look. So here's the stencil. Here's the sprayed stencil. Let's take a look. Not too bad, but over here was where it was kind of wet, like through here. Doesn't look too bad. Looks pretty dry. So I think what we should do is we're going to airbrush lobster again, give that a sec to dry, and then we'll put on the red. And then after the red is done, we put the monkey stencil on and just do white. Those highlights and stuff like that, you know, his white outlines are one of the things that really helps the character to pop. If you take a look at him, this detail stuff, which is actually one of the scariest things that I was thinking I was going to have to do. Because if we had all these little tiny marks and I had to draw them by hand, the chance of this monkey looking the same as it does right now seemed extremely unrealistic. I can draw it, but it's definitely not going to be as good as the computer represents it, obviously. So we'll take one more second, you know, to paint this guy, and I'll set you guys back up on the stand so you can kind of watch. Hold on one sec. All right, you guys see that okay? Maybe look down on it a little bit more. Way! Oops. That looks pretty good, right? All right. So we're going to use the same airbrush because we're using the same color. Another thing that's fun with the airbrush is making sure your air hose isn't underneath your chair. Still got some paint in there, so that's not bad. That'll help us. This time we're going to put a little more so that we don't run out. That's about how much I got in there. I like to kind of put the cap on whenever I can because that way I don't spill it, you know. Need my paper towel. Gonna have to just give me 1 second. Be right back with you. Sorry, guys. Sorry about that. Sometimes you gotta stop for a sec. You know what I'm talking about? All right, so we're gonna finish up painting this lobster, and then we're gonna see how much time we have left and see if we can paint it with the red. Guys, see that okay? All right. All right, don't do that. It's a good way to make a big mess. All right, so remember we said don't start over your surface. So you want to get some air going. And then we just want to start to paint a little. Now this time we're going to try to go a little bit lighter. We went a little heavy last time. And we just want to kind of, you know, glaze around. Go light, you know. There you go. So unfortunately, I think I still didn't put enough paint in. So we'll just put a little bit more. See, around that much. You don't have to use a lot of paint when airbrushing. You can always fill in more, you know, later. You can always add a little bit of paint if you need to, because the airbrush paint is so thin. You know, it's literally as close as you can get a spray can. I used to say that I'm a reformed graffiti artist. I moved inside so I could work with the airbrush. Kind of a big deal, you know, like kind of fun. You know what I mean? Sometimes you get air bubbles in your paint. If that happens, there's something going on. Like something in the airbrush is sticking. Most of the time, 90+% of the time, it's stuff on your needle. Occasionally, it's your needle bent. And then it's cleaning, you know, just dirty airbrush. So now we're basically done putting the lobster on. A little here on his feet, I guess. And up here a little. Right? Looks pretty good. You guys want to take a look at it from the top? So far, this is where we're at. It's looking all right. And we want to leave as many of those bits there as we can, because we're going to need that background to stay flat, really ongoing. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to work on this again on Friday, and I need that to still be there. One of the reasons I have it on a Mayo stand, which is this sort of medical table, you know, that I have the stuff on, is so that you can move it to the side of your studio and have it stay without getting messed up in any way, you know, without anything falling over or anybody bumping into it. Do I bump into it? Yeah, a lot. But you have at least a slightly better chance. And then, of course, you know, I'm doing a number of other art projects, and I can't do all my stuff if this is in the middle of my desk. I'm doing kind of new stuff all the time. You know, we're trying to create programming that we can work with virtually. And I realize a lot of folks don't have an airbrush. And this time right now is probably a little bit unrealistic to think you could get one, especially without being able to see one. But you know what? I would love for folks to think about it. So we can't do anything else with this piece because we have to let it dry. We don't have a huge amount of time left. We have, you know, about 12 minutes. So what I figured I would do is I'm going to show you guys a couple of different airbrush models that you might be interested in. I don't sell these, and I was not sponsored on this video. But you know, sometimes I felt like the first time I saw an airbrush that I thought was really cool, you know, I got more into it. You know, we mentioned the Master that's at Harbor Freight. No, that's not a high quality airbrush at all. The two big companies are Iwata that I've mentioned and Pache. Grex is a relatively newcomer to the airbrush world. Some of the other airbrushes that I am working with. Oh, sorry about that. Are right here, and I would like to show you a couple of them. So this guy right here is an Iwata product. This is an extremely inexpensive airbrush designed for beginners that want to get used to a high quality airbrush at an affordable price. So Iwata makes this. Now, one of the things about Iwata that makes them awesome is that they're built in Japan, where they really take engineering on such a thing kind of really seriously. So all of the products in Iwata are high quality. The needles are super dense, so they don't bend quite that easy. All of the equipment in here and stuff is coated. All the equipment in this area is coated in chrome, which makes it a little bit harder for the paint to stick on it, makes it slightly easier for us to clean. This is a great thing about Iwata. This particular airbrush, is not something that Iwata should be proud of, really. This is kind of a crappy airbrush in that this is Iwata designing an extremely low quality airbrush and then sending it to China to be assembled and built. One of the big problems it has right off the bat is that it actually isn't chromed inside. And if you look around here, you can see that there's actually rust coming in, splitting through the chrome clear coat that they have over this thing. Not that great. Needles are pretty thin. Assembly is straightforward and simple. That was something I wanted to show you at the beginning of our video, but I forgot. So the needle is the most important part of the airbrush. And then this right here is the needle bolt, which holds the needle into place. This guy right here is the tensioner, which has a spring on it. That's how your trigger works. You want to be careful about articulating the trigger without the needle, because in this particular model, the needle is held in by the needle. The trigger is held in by the needle. When you're putting the needle back in, it's pretty obvious how far in you have to go, because you'll be able to see, I don't know if you can see that, see the needle sticking out. Right? Now there's a little tiny needle cap in there. So what you don't want to do is split it. Right? And you'll notice if you don't tighten this, you're just moving your spring. Right? And there you go. And you notice that we're freeing up our trigger a lot. Right? Now it's also double action, down for air, back for paint. You know, I'm bad mouthing it, and I'm sorry about that. But the airbrush itself, I've seen at Michael's for around $50. Especially if you go and grab one of those Michael's coupons. You can probably get this airbrush right here for $50. I would go a little bit quick because Michael seems to not be carrying airbrush stuff anymore. In fact, Michael's has stopped carrying anything that I'm interested in anymore. My Michael's actually has cut down on buying paper. So, you know, who knows? The problem is that they're really centrally located and there's a lot of them. In my state, I don't know where all you guys are from. I imagine the kids I'm talking to are in my state of Massachusetts. But if not, I hope you have a better deal, because here we have a lot of Michaels and 2 Dick Blick. Dick Blick is is a great art supply store. They have, you know, full service. They have everything. But the problem was they came in and bought all the independent art stores. And I don't know about you guys, but like a comic shop, I like to go through art stores and find something I didn't know existed, or pick up something new because it was there, or the idea that stuff sits on a shelf long enough that people who run art stores sometimes can give you a discount. I was at a great paint store, one of the very few independent paint stores in Massachusetts. In fact, I only know of 2, which is C.C. Lowell in Worcester and Playtime in Arlington. I was at Playtime, and I do all of my collage work here on hard surface gesso boards. And they're not super expensive, but they're relatively expensive. And the ones I was using were Dick Blick products specifically, so you can only get them from Dick Blick. So I happened to be at Playtime, and people had looked at gesso boards and then pushed them back in. And when they pushed them back in, the ceramic surface, the ceramic and gesso mixed together, because that's what the boards have on them, cracked, hitting the wall. So when they pulled them out, there was a whole bunch that were kind of trash, which is really relevant if you're a painter. But if you're not a painter, you're a collage artist, you cover the entire surface in new stuff. So it doesn't matter that it's cracked. So I was able to get all those surfaces for a dramatically less price because I was in a shop that, you know, had them and was a mom and pop type operation. So if anybody's in the town of Arlington looking for art supplies, please go to Playtime. I do not have their address. They didn't ask me to say that, but I love them and I think they're really, really great. Same is true with C.C. Lowell in Worcester. C.C. Lowell is a really great store. It's on Pleasant Street in Worcester. I don't know of any other art supply stores that are in the Worcester area. One great thing, C.C. Lowell is kind of small, so you're not going to find something necessarily you haven't seen. But what they have that's really cool is they have what's called the Unapascha refrigerator. This is a giant display unit for Unapascha markers. We will talk about Unapaschas a little bit more in the marker demo. But they have a huge supply of them. So that basically means they have every different Unapasca marker. Unapasca doesn't make as many colors as I think they should, but they make quite a few, and their products are really high quality. This marker I showed you guys earlier right here is a marker that I had never seen before. It's a really, significant paint marker as far as amount of paint in it, but it's really short. You know what I mean? So fits in your pocket, or fits in different marker cases and goes larger. These are like about this one's an 8mm nib on it. So you can work much larger. Personally, I don't do a ton of larger work, but that particular marker will be working with me when I do the surfboard. So I think that was most of what I had for you guys for today. We are going to be doing this same thing 2 days a week, Wednesday and Fridays. The next one will be finishing our airbrush project and moving on to the next one, which is basically the first of the finished decks. Between now and Friday, I'm going to cut a few smaller stencils so that we can do a slightly different layout on 2 boards. We're going to see if we have enough time to get through finishing this one and setting up the next one on the 2 hours we have on Friday. If that doesn't work out, I'll probably finish it up off camera. We'll go as far as we can, finish it up off camera, and kind of go from there. Oh yeah, before I forget, I wanted to show you one other airbrush. So like I said, that one's sort of a bottom end Iwata product. The ones I've been using are the Grex. And then the other company I mentioned is Pache. Now, if you look at this airbrush, this is called the Talon. This looks like an awesomely cool airbrush. It's got this opening here for articulating your needle, so you don't have to take the back off. This same tensioner, double action, the same as I said. It's got this crown cap on the front, which is actually a little bit better because it has not 2 but 3 cutouts. The needle cap and stuff is all like, significant to like large, pretty good size. Now this reservoir for paint is honestly epically huge. Really, really deep. Now, more cup than you need is totally fine because less, is kind of not cool. But this one is not, you can't change it. Like on every other airbrush that I have ever used, you can change the cup. I have any number of extra cups, but for some reason, this particular one comes with the cup welded on. Whatever, a detractor. But this is a bigger airbrush than any of the other ones I have. I find that to be cool. It also feels really significant in your hand. It's heavy. I personally probably would have never bought this airbrush, but I was at, yet again, an art supplies place. This particular place was Bear Air, which was an art supply store down in Easton, Massachusetts. I don't think it's around anymore, but standing in his place, he had a bunch of these that the boxes had gotten damaged. So he said, you want to try it? This is a pretty expensive airbrush, I think around maybe $200. So I was like, yeah, sure. Give me one. Let's see. I think I paid $75. Really great device. The support from Pache is really high quality. What I have always liked about Pache has been around for about 100 years. They've been making really good stuff. They also chromed interiors and all that kind of stuff. Pretty good. Only problem I've had at all with this is there's a seal for air in here. I'm going to have to replace that. But that was really kind of it. I really like this. In the end of the day, same thing I was talking about earlier, I felt like the pistol grip airbrush was going to be a little bit better for me. So I haven't been using this one that much. But we'll see. Maybe it'll come back next week. So if you guys are interested in any of the stuff that we talked about today or any of the stuff that we've been doing, please send me a comment. Any questions or anything like that, you can also send that through comments. I would love to hear from you guys. I think that I'm sort of excited about this way of doing our classes. I know I've been talking for 2 hours, and I'm sorry about that, but I appreciate you guys listening, and we're going to finish up this project on Friday, and we'll hopefully be able to make it look as good as we did on the mock-up board. This one is also really just a test, After this is done, we'll see what happens on the finished board since we have to do 4 of those. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much. If anybody needs to reach me not on Facebook, you can reach me at David_Sebastian at waysideyouth.org. My last name is spelled Sebastian. Astian, just like the saint. All right. Be well, you guys. Be safe. And watch out for all the trouble in the world. And I'll hopefully see all you guys on Friday. Have a great day.